Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City Council budget briefing for January 11th, right? 2021. In the back, you'll notice there's open meetings law posted in the northwest corner of the room, and we will start with our presentation from our finance department.
Yay.
There we go. Jamie told me it takes just a minute to load. There we go. Good afternoon. I'm Sherry Wolf-Durbel, your budget officer.
Do you speak more into the mic? There we go.
Absolutely.
Thank
Is that
you.
better?
Yeah.
There we go. Point it in the
Gotta
right
make sure
direction.
everybody hears.
All right. Well, thank you for your time this afternoon to begin talking about the 21-22 budget process. We're going to be sharing some information with you, but one of our goals here, both at this forecast meeting and then as we go into the outcome meetings over the next couple months, is to get your priorities and your input for the 21-22 budget process. Our agenda for today is up here, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about the operating budget process, and our planning director, David Carey, is going to jump in and talk about the CIP process. And then, as we typically do in the budget forecast, the second agenda item on the budget basics, I'll talk just a little bit about some of our fund structures and major revenues and expenditures. And then for the actual budget forecast, Brandon Kaufman, our finance director, is going to join us via Zoom from Wichita, Kansas, to make his last budget forecast presentation.
Thank you, Brandon.
So the process that we go through is largely governed by city charter or municipal code and state statutes. The requirements that we adopt a balanced budget and that we can only appropriate 90% of the property taxes that are levied come from the code and the charter. It also defines the schedule that we follow. And then state laws that we talk about the most, the one we talk about the most is probably the restricted funds requirement. It limits some of our major funding sources, sales tax, property tax, and highway allocation funds to growth of 2.5%. There is a provision where the city council can allow us to have an additional 1% of restricted funds authority that we typically vote on each year. State law also has a levy limit of 45 cents, which with our property tax at just over 31 cents, we have not had to pay a lot of attention to that requirement. State law defines the process for adopting the property tax rate, the schedule, and then of course we always come back to you after the adoption of the budget to actually adopt the tax rate in September. And state law also includes provisions for making amendments to the budget. There's some language in there about unforeseen circumstances that has been utilized in the past when it was necessary to make some changes to the budget. And then state law also outlines the process, the public hearing, and the notifications for that amendment process. So next, I'll talk just a little bit about the calendar for the process. Again, it's pretty much all laid out for us in the code or some resolutions. You have seen a budget schedule for this summer. Please put all those really important dates on your calendar so that you can be part of the process. The very next items that are going to be coming up are the outcome meetings. The first one of those is on January 25th, and that topic is going to be a safe and healthy city. The calendar is also available on our budget website, and we will be coming back to you at some point here to get a little more detail from you on the actual hearings with departments. We haven't really put in the detail of that part of the process after the mayor's budget's released, but we'll be coming back to that. All right, and I think here, just before I jump in and let David talk about his CIP process, here are a couple of important documents where we have tons of reference information. I can speak to the operating budget, particularly in the first 3 tabs. The introduction and policy sections and the financial section contain a lot of really detailed information about the budget and all of our funding sources and expenditures. To kind of summarize what we're anticipating this year's budget process to look like, you're all very aware that due to COVID, you passed an ordinance for us last year that suspended the biennial budget requirements so that we could adopt an annual budget and give ourselves some time to see how the economy and our sales tax in particular, as well as some of our other fee revenues, not to mention our expenses of dealing with COVID. It just gave us more time to gather some information about that. As we go into this year's budget process, we are not asking the departments to start over and submit new budget requests. A credible amount of work has already gone into that, and so we're essentially going to be balancing the budget based on the requests that have been submitted for year 2 with the new information that we have regarding our current revenue and expenditure situations. All right, with that, unless there's any questions about the operating budget process, I think I'll let David talk about the CIP process for a minute.
Anybody have any questions for Sherry at this point? We reserve the right to recall you.
Yes.
No. Okay.
Signatures. No signatures
Well, there was a
necessary.
nice recall joke there, wasn't it? Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome, David.
David Carey with the Planning Department. Thank you for some time this afternoon to talk a little bit about the CIP. As you know, the Planning Department is charged with putting together the CIP, working with all the different departments and the City Council and the Mayor's Office to come up with a capital budget that goes along with the operating budget. The CIP is a 6-year program, so this past year, because it was a 1-year budget, the first year became the capital budget. In the typical 2-year biennial process, it would be the first 2 years. So we enter this cycle a little bit different than what we've gotten used to in the last several years because we have to do another 1-year budget. So as Sherry just mentioned, an awful lot of work has already been done on that second year because we went into most of last year's effort thinking it was going to be a 2-year budget. So the strategy and purpose right now is to keep the process streamlined, effectively take the current second year, pull it into the first year, and have that largely be the capital 1-year budget as we go forward. The idea here is that the vast majority of work has been done already. I'm not going to sit here and say that there won't be any changes, but we're going to try to limit the changes. So a good starting point for all of you would be to take a look at that second year in the CIP, and we'll work from that. Really, a lot of I'm just going to check my notes here for a moment. We have just started the process formally. A letter went out to the departments today to let them know what the effort will be like. The planning staff will be doing the bulk of the work. We're going to be working with our departments, obviously, but we're going to be doing a lot of the update of the program in OpenGov and the document itself so that the departments can keep doing their work largely as usual. Certainly there will need to be coordination with the departments. We will do that as usual. We will be on schedule and be bringing this forward, the new CIP forward at the typical date, which would be late March, early April for a hearing at the Planning Commission so that they have their finding of conformity prior to the 6-year CIP being delivered to the Finance Department. But we're going to keep it on schedule. We're going to stay on the schedule that would be typical. The schedule that you saw earlier from Sherry, that is the how we will fit that into that process. So you shouldn't see any significant difference just because we're dealing with pandemic and 1-year budgets. So that's the goal, so that from what you get and what you are observing, you're seeing something fairly typical. and you have your opportunity to ask your questions and work on the budget that way. So with that, I can certainly answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Director Carey? Yes.
Thank you, David, very much. Could you review again? I know that there was a little bit of consternation about how an elected official can provide input when it comes to the CIP with concerns or things that they would like reviewed, or if they would like to even make recommendations or changes. When is the appropriate time in the process?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think that our door is always open to have that conversation. If any of you want to have that discussion at any time from this point moving forward, we're certainly open to having that conversation. That certainly can inform us to understand what you all might be thinking about going into this budget cycle. So that's always the case. So that continues to be available. Certainly, the part of what we do is we will be coming forward to you on a departmental basis for departmental budgets, in addition to CIP topics, going into the next several weeks. So that's that schedule that was up on the screen earlier, where the departmental presentations based on budget outcome themes, and there will be presentations given to this body in the next month or so. So that certainly would be an opportunity to provide us comment both on the departmental budgets, as well as if there are capital budget questions or suggestions. We will be receiving all those comments at that time. So early on, that would be the opportunity. And then there's the typical process where, certainly there's the budget is delivered to you, and then you have your own process to review and to comment and to make changes during your process.
Okay. Councilperson Washington.
David, I'm going to reword a little bit of what you said, just so that I make sure I understand. So as we get the budget presentations on safe and healthy cities and stuff like that, so we are also, besides getting the department's budget, we're going to get the CIP projects associated with that goal. Yes?
You will not be getting, at those meetings, you won't be getting the draft CIP yet, because it still will be a work in progress.
Okay.
But especially in this cycle, I would say that the current second year of the CIP is absolutely the starting point, and the goal is to not change it as too much based on what the work that already went into it last year. So if you want to look at that second year going into those discussions and then have any questions you might have, certainly that would be a good way to do that.
Okay. Thank you. And then you said that for conformity, you expect to do the hearing with the Planning Commission the end of March?
Late March or early April, depending on what meeting cycle we can meet as far as being fully ready to go and get it out to the public and everything.
Thank you.
Yes, that's the schedule. Yep.
Any other questions? I think you answered mine. Yes, go ahead.
So David, what happens at the Planning Commission meeting? You present what to them?
So there is by charter, there's a requirement that any capital expenditure by the city has to have a conformity review with the comprehensive plan. And the Planning Commission fills that role. That is what they do. They'll look at the CIP as it's been put together for whatever cycle, and the staff certainly will give a recommendation of what that level of conformity is, and then they will affirm or change that determination. From that point, going into the budget process, certainly changes can be made. The real caveat there is that for example, if there is a new project that comes up during the budget process, if it wasn't part of that conformity review by the Planning Commission, before it could be put into the capital budget, it would have to go back to the Planning Commission and have that conformity review, which could be done, but that's not the typical process. We usually try to cover the bases at that point with the Planning Commission.
Okay, so any changes to the CIP done throughout our budget process must already be included in the CIP. Is that fair?
By the time it goes to planning.
By the time it goes to planning. Otherwise, it won't be in the document.
And again, just so I'm hopefully being clear, if the project is already in the CIP but isn't necessarily in a particular year, there could be shifting of that without having to go back for a conformity review. If it's a brand new project that hadn't yet been considered, that's what would have to go back to Planning Commission. We try to avoid that that extra step, because that obviously is hard to do once we get into the budget process.
But anything that's in the CIP, the one approved by the planning commissioners, is subject to adjustment, so in the budget process.
Yes, it can be, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So are you saying the same thing if we wanted to remove a project?
Well, for example, that's a good question. For example, if for whatever reason, a budget determination is that we have to not do a project at a particular time, that can't fit it into the budget year, certainly that change can happen without having to go back to planning commission.
Okay. So we should basically take the second year of the CIP and say that's our starting point at
Correct.
this point. And if we have any concerns, we probably ought to get a hold of you like now.
Yes, as soon as possible, certainly. I mean, that'll be better if there are concerns.
The sooner.
And if project, this last question, I think. So I understand, so year two is now going to be our year one moving forward. So we always have a new year one, so that it rolls. And so year two will now be our year one. We have 6 years. If a project could not be fit within the 6-year period, they just slip down, become later. So what Chairman McGinnis had asked, the question about removing a project, that would just delay a project, or, and so it would shift down, it might be in year 7, forecasted for year 7, so it won't show up again in the CIP until after some other projects are completed.
Yeah, if the timing of the project is such that it actually would move out of the 6-year CIP, I think I need to be clear that the city council doesn't take action on the 6-year CIP. You would only take action on the actual budget years. In this case, it'd be another 1-year budget instead of a 2-year budget. So really, whether it slips, the real difference would be if it fits into the first-year CIP capital budget, or it has to go to an out year. It's a little less, it is less of a need to be completely down to the dime and the nickel in those out years. We want to be representative of what's feasible, but it's not a budget out there, so we don't have to make sure that it fits. So it could just be pushed out and sit in year 3 or 4 for the time being.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Sure.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the budget structure and some of our major funding sources. So we all spend a lot of time focusing on property tax, and we just always like to point out, although this is really important, the city's portion of the total property tax continues to be about 16% of the total levy. And when we adopt the budget, we are actually adopting many budgets for a number of different funds. We spend the majority of our time talking about the general fund, where the property and sales tax revenues go. This is the fund that, our major public safety, police, fire, city council, mayor's office, finance. This is our major operating fund. Some other fund types that we have all these different funds primarily because certain revenues can be used only for specific purposes. So special revenue funds, for instance, the health department, 911 communications, or StarTran, they generate a significant amount of revenue that can only be used for the purposes of their operations, but they still require a general fund subsidy because they don't generate enough revenue to support all of their operations. Capital project funds are used to account for things like the Lincoln on the Move sales tax for capital projects. Some capital projects might also have a variety of funding sources that were gathering the total cost of the project with all those various revenue sources. Debt service funds are pretty self-explanatory. That's where we account for bond proceeds and then the resulting principal and interest payments. Permanent funds are typically more often referred to as trust funds. Parks Foundation, Library Foundation, Community Health Endowment are some of the permanent funds that we account for. Enterprise funds are totally self-sustaining, like water and wastewater funds. And then internal service funds are operations like information services and fleet services that support all of our city departments. And they are funded by rates that they charge to all the city departments, some of those general fund as well as the enterprise funds and other fund sources. The purpose of this slide is just to show proportionately those funds are grouped into these various categories that we just discussed. And of our total $598.5 million budget, the taxing funds make up about $211 million of that.
Can you go back for like 2 seconds?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Are you going to be able to send us this?
I said, we can make this, you guys are frantically taking notes, we can share this presentation with you.
This is a very interesting,
That is an interesting block.
yeah, graphic. Thank you.
So, we have currently 6 tax funds. You may remember from last year's budget process that we are phasing out the Social Security and unemployment compensation funds. So we no longer have a tax levy there. However, delinquent property tax will continue to come into those funds for a while. That needs to be accounted for and can only be used for the purposes that it was levied for. So there's still some accounting there, although we're no longer levying a tax for those funds. Obviously, the general fund gets the majority. It's the largest tax fund. It gets the majority of the property tax revenue. So, the purpose of this slide is to show that we're essentially a three-legged stool. We have property tax, we have sales tax, and we have everything else, that all of our other funding sources only make up about 30% of our total revenues. And this shows where the majority of the funding goes. 66% of our tax fund costs are for personnel costs. Transfers, the second largest category, those transfers include subsidies to funds like StarTran and Health, and that also reflects where transfers are made to capital improvement projects in that category as well. And then whenever we're talking about the budget and looking at where the money goes, it's important to understand that we're doing a really good job of funding our top priority, public safety. We're up to almost 58% of the budget now goes towards public safety. So unless you have additional questions, that's kind of your overview, your review of our major revenues and expenditures. And if you have questions now, we can address those, or hopefully Jamie's got Brandon on deck to jump in here with the budget forecast.
Brandon.
You got one?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Sherry, would you please define public safety as it's used here, like which departments fall under public safety?
Absolutely. I do my best off the top of my head. So obviously police, those are general fund police costs, and fire, the 911 communications center. And this particular chart here reflects just the subsidy that goes to the 911, because this is just about the tax funds. In other public safety, I think the biggest item that remains in that category is for the public defender's office, the city share of the public defender's office. What else goes in here? There's a little piece of fire prevention that's general funded in building and safety. A percentage of law department, the prosecution, I think it's about 40% of the law department is prosecution. We consider that a public safety cost. So those are some of the big ones.
Thank you.
Sherry, is there a way that I could get history on a lot of these funds? Like 3-year history of what they were before and what percentage of public safety was 3-5 years ago?
We have a spreadsheet for you on that one for sure.
Okay, thanks.
As far as, again, if you're specific, I think we can definitely get you all of those things. It's a question of, we talked recently about the CAFR, and that's where all the data is. But I'm assuming you have some funds that you're more specifically interested in seeing the history. I think some of that will be part of the outcome meetings we've talked about, including some budget information in those presentations as well. But no, keep letting us know what it is you're after, and obviously we can get that information to you.
I think Richard's point is a good one, sorry. To see, like, 3 years ago, were we spending 57.9% on public safety, or was it 62%? I don't know. Are we consistent with the funding for public safety and?
Yes, and we have a spreadsheet on that. I think it goes back to like 2005, 2006, if you really want to go back that far. It's a statistic we've been tracking for a long time.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I don't have like a specific number question, but since I'm still new to this process, what is the biggest misconception or the hardest thing for newer council members to understand as they start this process, right? So like, what's the biggest misconception that the public has when it comes to like our revenue or expenses?
I guess the first slide that we show in the budget basic thing would probably, from my perspective, be something that I would point at. The city council gets a lot of pressure on the property tax, and we only control 16% of that tax. So I think that's one fact that's always important to keep in mind anyway.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any other questions for Sherry at this time?
All right, Jamie, are you out there? I'm like reaching out for help on where's Brandon?
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can advance to the next slide.
Can you see it, Brandon? We're on assumptions of building the forecast.
I can see the back of your head, but not the slides.
That
That's not working. Yeah, I think Jane, you'll have to put the slide deck on the screen.
The slide deck is on the screen.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so, these are, just talk real quick about some of the assumptions of building the forecast. So one, we're really early in the forecast. There's going to be, and I told you all this last year, there's going to be a lot of changes between now and the budget release. And really, we're looking at some basically current service levels. So, taking 2021 as a base level, and then making some tweaks, so for the example, this forecast, I think there were some things we tried to build back in from a cut perspective, like, the 1% application that all the departments took. So there's some stuff that was adjusted back to the base. In addition, based on city council policy, there's pension requirements that have to be met on an annual basis. And so we do have good numbers from HR, so we've adjusted pension requirement for those contributions. And then from there, we apply a number of broad assumptions, adjustments for personnel, supplies and services, transfers out to other funds. So there's a lot of broad assumptions that are put into this. And as we continue to move through the budget process, those will get refined. For example, personnel, as Sherry showed you earlier, they make up a huge portion of the overall budget. And right now we have 1 contract settled and 5 up. So, we're building some major assumptions into that. Go to the next slide.
Brandon, if you can multitask and check your email a little bit too. James is trying to send you the slide deck, if that would be helpful. But now you're on the tax fund overview.
Yep, I can see it now.
Oh, good.
So tax fund overview. So like Sherry mentioned, we did have 6. We transitioned down to 4. So general fund, library, debt, and police and fire pension. The debt just accounts for the general obligation debt that's approved by voters. And she also mentioned we did have those two funds, Social Security and unemployment, and we combined those to the general fund. Primary rule of public accounting is the less funds, the better. So, the more we can get rid of, the better. And you've already seen this, as Sherry kind of mentioned, that third three-legged stool there. So property tax, sales tax. So today we're going to be focusing on mainly on property sales tax, hit a little bit on occupation taxes as well to let you know where we see that going. So property tax, by far, residential and commercial make up all the property tax valuations for the city of Lincoln. You can see there's a little bit of personal property in there at 3%, a very, very tiny sliver of agriculture. And then we also have centrally assessed properties. Those are properties that are assessed by the state of Nebraska, typically deal with like railroad pipelines, those types of utilities. So property tax valuations, right now you can see we've got the last 3 years on there. So we've continued to see significant valuation changes in the community based on real estate and the changes that the county assessor makes in evaluating those property trends. You see for 21-22, at this point, we're estimating a 5.05% increase in valuations. And, like I've told you all earlier before, this is really early in the process for evaluation. So typically about this time, I think maybe in the last week, the assessor came out and said, they're looking at another residential revaluation. So when those property valuations come out, they're going to see significant variances potentially compared to the prior year. So we have in this forecast built in a residential revaluation increase. So we're estimating somewhere around a 9% increase in residential properties, which is kind of really what's causing that number to be estimated right about 5%. As you think through this too, there's always two components of evaluation. So one, you have new construction or growth, and then you also have revaluation. So these numbers here are the valuation numbers for 1920, which is the base valuations for our 2021 budget. So you can see we had about 232 million in new construction and residential in the community that made up, 2/3 of the overall growth, or above 2/3. And then about 107 million of revaluation occurred on residential property in the last year. Same thing, this is commercial. So you can see last year, if you remember, there was more of a revaluation on commercial property. So revaluation was greater, about 267 million for commercial, and then 165 million for new construction in the community for commercial last year. So when you take those two together and you combine them, for the prior year, it was about 54% growth. 54% of the increase was caused by new construction in the community for the valuation of the budget. So that's property tax. Now kind of transitioning over to sales tax, which is the largest from a revenue standpoint for the taxing and the general fund. All the sales tax proceeds go into the general fund that support operations. We do have also the sales tax that funds Lincoln on the Move, the street initiative, and those get segregated into a separate fund. However, I just wanted to show you, so coronavirus impacts. So, obviously going into the last budget cycle, we were fairly concerned about potential impacts from coronavirus on sales tax. You can see, and there's always a 2-month lag. So May was collections for March, and then so forth moving forward. So You can see March, April, May were pretty dismal months and this is comparing back to the prior year at the same period. And then since then, we've seen a really positive trend. January will likely be another drop because we have a huge refund coming through that month. But we have seen positive trends in sales tax. However, it's also a tale of two stories almost. So if you go to the next slide. So we do get some information now from the state that we've been able to break down information based on at high levels, based on the NAICS codes that businesses submit under. So you can see, some industries, especially the hospitality industry, has been greatly impacted by coronavirus versus, others like general merchandise or building material and supply that have seen positive results. This is kind of month by month looking at the prior year. So it's almost, a tale of two cities here where some have seen great results because of the pandemic, but others have been greatly impacted. Go to the next slide. So right now we're forecasting about a 2.6% increase in the 2021 budget, and then about a 2.2% increase for the 21-22 budget. So that 2.6, when we were developing the budget process, I would say we were fairly conservative, just based off of where we didn't know what would happen at the time. So I think we were very conservative in our sales tax estimates. So we forecasted about a 3.7% drop in sales tax. So right now we're estimating that 2.6. So that's about a $4.8 million swing for the 2021 budget. And then moving into 21-22, estimating about 2.2% increase. So I'd say sales tax is by far the hardest revenue stream that we have to project. And when we look at this, we also look at a statistical sampling. So we want to be 95% confident that we are going to fall within a range. So the upper bound of that range is 4.29%. And then the lower bound of that range is 1.85%. So you can see for 21-22, we're estimating that 2.2% is a lot closer to the lower bound of that 95% confidence level range. Occupation taxes. So just wanted to show you in the chart. So occupation taxes have been decreasing since 2012, 2013. Primarily, these are made up of telecommunication companies and then also cable franchise. So those have been continuing to decrease and are forecasted to continue to decrease as well, moving into the future for this forecast. Okay, so some of the overall assumptions built into this forecast. So operations tax rate of 0.30374, voter approved tax rate. So that's all the tax rate that's dedicated to the general obligation debt that's outstanding, for a total tax rate of 0.31980. So that is flat. So we're projecting a flat tax rate for this year. For the forecast, property valuation, we talked about that, 5% increase, sales tax at 2.2, estimating decrease in occupation taxes of a little over 4%, and then the LAS return on equity about 4.86% increase. And then also, like I talked about earlier, we apply some very broad assumptions early on in this process for expenditures. So from a personnel standpoint, and this is typically based on historical averages for percent increases, we're estimating 3.7%. Like I said, we got 5 of the 6 union contracts that need to be settled to get closer to where we'll actually end up. And then we apply a number of broad level supplies for inflationary type supplies, 2%, services and charges to transfers, which Sherry mentioned earlier, primarily go to fund the outside departments like health, StarTran at 4%. And then I'm skipping down to police and fire pension. We're estimating that increase at 7.97%. And just so you can see where we're at, so police and fire pension for 21-22, based on council policy, we have to contribute whatever the actuarial required contribution rate is. So that ARC rate is estimated to be a little over 21-22, a little over $10 million for the upcoming budget year. So to sum it all up, to get to kind of bottom line, so tax fund forecast, you can see last year we adopted a total budget of approximately 11 million balanced budget. If you remember last year, we started out, that number started somewhere around 17, got it down to 12 before we got into the final balancing act to get that amount to 0. However, as we worked through the budget in the last year, we also didn't have a balanced 21-22 budget. So I would also tell you that the sales tax that we're seeing better results now has really helped from a balancing perspective for the 21-22 budget. So at this point, looking at a deficit of 1.6 million, you see that's a little under 1% of the total budget. So that's a pretty good place to start, especially compared to where we thought we'd be at this time last year. Also, it can never end a budget talk without talking about restricted funds. So a lot changes and will vary with this until we get to a final budget number. You can see the forecast continues to trend down, especially at the 2.5% growth. So restricted fund law basically caps revenue growth at 2.5%. And then we have to go through this formula calculation with some exemptions allowed. That comes to basically a balance amount for those restricted funds. Once you get to 0, and our funds at that point would no longer be allowed to grow any more than 2.5. And basically one of the main things that you have once you hit that level is property tax. You would have to at some point decrease that property tax rate, which would in turn have operating impacts on budgets. However, the 2.5 plus is the orange bar plus the 1% that the council can improve on an annual basis. You can see has a little bit of an impact moving forward. And so this is probably the biggest fiscal crisis out there looming. At some point, the city's going to get to a point where they're at 0. And the impacts, from not allowing those revenues to grow more than 2.5% is really going to be felt on the operations of the city at some point in the future.
That was our last slide. So I think at this time is where we would
I have a
really
lot of questions, don't you?
like to hear your impressions and your thoughts about the presentation and your priorities for the budget process.
Okay. I can start if you want. Brandon, you said 54% of the tax valuation increase was due to new businesses or new commercial or new residential, new growth.
Residential.
New construction in the community.
So 54% of the increase was due to, okay.
Yeah, so it's a little bit over, and that's only residential, that slide right there, but so a little over 54% between commercial, residential. That increase was caused by new construction in the community.
So the reevaluation next year, what percentage of that is, you're saying we're going to see a 5%, or what was your number, 5?
So yeah,
Increase? Is 54% of that 5% increase going to be new construction? Is that what
It's
you're
hard.
estimating?
It's hard to answer that at this point in time, because we don't have any solid numbers yet from the assessor's office. The assessor's office typically has to submit a report to the state in early March to make sure that they're within the certified ranges that's required by state law. So typically in late March, we have a decent idea of where valuations are going and what the comparison would be from a growth versus revaluation standpoint.
Okay, so we will have a better idea of the abstract, the amount of money that we will be able to draw from. A couple other quick questions. What are we doing with the, I say excess money that we received, since we budgeted for a lot less in sales tax? Looks like we've got 4 to 5 million extra that we've received compared to what we budgeted in sales tax. Is that being budgeted in the 2021 or the 21 year, 21, 22? Do we carry that forward? And
those monies would come in during the 2021 budget cycle, and assuming that, we don't have other adjustments, like we know there's going to be impacts in charges for services where people aren't using park rentals and those types of things. So, it's one aspect of revenue in a collection of a lot of sources. But let's say if everything else came in at what was budgeted and we received 4 million plus in sales tax, at the end of the year, that would basically go into reserves without some type of mayor council action to spend that. And then those would basically, as part of your discussion for the 21-22 budget, you can discuss how to appropriately spend those dollars.
okay. I didn't know if we could spend them without having to put them in our budget in the first place. We can't spend more than what we budgeted for. Is that correct?
And that's what Brandon is suggesting as part of the 21-22 budget process. We could consider if our overall revenues were still greater than anticipated because of the healthier sales tax.
Okay.
But that would be part of the 21-22 budget decisions.
Councilperson Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brandon, thank you first for coming in from Wichita to give us this report. I would like to see the sales tax slide again. That shows.
Testing my memory, Sandra, to see if I can remember the order. Right, property. There we
I
go.
think this is it, yeah, because I wanted to see where we are right now. So we're doing better than projected, which is great. And then you had a forecast on this one, I think. Yeah, the percentage change. So when we look at the percentage change, looking at 2021 and 21-22, and you're suggesting that we're going to get perhaps 2.6% more in sales tax or than we budgeted? Are you suggesting we're going to just continue to rise sales tax? What's happening there?
So this forecast, that 2.6% is a projected increase from the prior year.
From the prior year. And then the 2.2 is another 2% increase over the prior year,
Over this year.
Yes.
over this year. Okay.
Yes, over this year. So when we developed the budget, we estimated a 3.7% decrease. And now we're estimating a 2.6 increase from the prior year.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilperson.
Could we go back to the last slide, please? Now, I've done, is
Oh,
that?
one more.
No, one more. Okay, so at least 3 budgets, before, for the last 3 budgets, I've asked for this to be presented differently, because it's the only slide I think I've ever seen which shows a 2.5% increase going down. What I'd like to see is that 2.5% going up, and the 2.5 plus 1% going up further, and then a budget line, expenditures line, rising to meet it. That makes more sense than watching this thing go down every year we look at it to reach 0. I think we need to have, it would be a better perspective for me to see the 2.5% rising and the expenditures rising to meet that. And
I think what this slide is trying to show is the balance that
Right.
that has been declining. But
I understand that, but I think I need to see it in a different way so I can understand it better.
Councilperson, oh, you have another question?
I was just gonna say, I've done this, I've asked the same question 3 different budget cycles, and this is the 3rd one, I mean, so hopefully I can get it this time.
Sherry or Brandon, I don't know if you know, but I am so intrigued about the sales tax increase, despite some of the hardship we are seeing with several of the hospitality industries. How can we get a better handle on what has caused these increases, which are great? It's always good to see, but what is it attributed to? When we get those numbers from the state of Nebraska, are they broken out in different categories so that we can, are they broken out in these categories or?
Essentially, and Brandon, do you want to jump in here? But I think this is what you're trying to illustrate. While the hospitality industry, which is a pretty good percentage of our overall sales tax, is down, other areas have remained really strong, like the building materials and general merchandise. Food has been, well, I guess we don't have sales tax on food, so.
But I guess, you know, what percentage of our sales tax revenue is coming in from online sales purchases? I mean, that to me is, we know that more and more people are purchasing things online, but how do we see it represented, and how do we, I guess, in our calculations, project for sales tax revenue now coming in from online purchases? I don't think the state of Nebraska even breaks that down.
Correct.
They don't.
That's so easy to do, isn't it? At least, I mean,
Well, part of the issue is, for example, Walmart, if they're doing online sales and sales here in their brick and mortar stores,
yeah.
that's reported from the state as one source, Walmart.
But it seems like such an easy thing to correct. Sherry, what do you think? Because you've done budgets.
This isn't my strength, is the
Okay.
state reporting. I don't know what it would take for them to break that out for us,
Just like
but
a body to talk to about that.
I think so.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we had the same discussion last year.
And I
And-
still have the same
and they-
questions.
I know, and it is a state of Nebraska issue, right, Sherry? I mean, we wish, I mean, it seems like it should be easy.
I mean, because it's, you know, interstate commerce, it may to some degree even be broader than the state. I really can't
But it would
answer
be,
that
yeah.
question.
It would be interesting to know. I don't disagree with you, Councilwoman Raybold, but I do remember the discussion, and I don't know if it was just statutorily left out of the legislative intent or what, because as business owners on this council, I know that you do the same budgeting process, or similar, so it shouldn't be so hard. It would be helpful in our process. Thank you.
Councilperson Washington.
I just wanted to add something in. I mean, just something I'm noticing by looking at this slide, which is very helpful. But if I'm thinking about what Councilwoman Raybold has asked and Councilwoman Ward, when I look at other miscellaneous and general merchandise, it's interesting to me that in general merchandise, it's such a huge departure at the end of the year, that the rise is so great on sales tax. If I read this correctly, Brandon, it looks like the month of December-ish is basically off the chart in sales tax revenue from general merchandise, and my assumption is that really is online. I didn't see a lot of, I didn't see significantly more shopping in town in December, though there were people out. I was out, but not the same kinds of shopping that I usually would see.
Different colors, different months.
I thought different colors were different months.
The colors are each month, the last few months, or,
I'm waiting for Brandon to jump in. This is his data.
okay.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember, I didn't put the months on there just because there's so much data on this chart already. That is just trying to be more of a graphical presentation. I think the dark green is the latest months. And the light green is the early months. So, light green representing March, dark green representing October. And I understand, the frustration with wanting to know online versus in store. Definitely would take some changes at the state level to be able to have access to that type of information. Honestly, it'd probably take reporting changes also at the state level as well from a requirement standpoint.
Any other questions at this point?
And just an observation, comparing, to colleagues across the country, I'd say that I think the city of Lincoln is faring better than most. I know there's definitely industries that are impacted, and you can see by the chart, much greater than others. But I think the overall economy has a stability to it, especially giving the state capital, having a university located here. A lot of those things bring a lot of overall stability to the local economy.
Okay. There was one other thing I know, Brandon, and I've asked you in the past is, how can we get up to date on where we stand today in our, maybe a quarterly budget report or something? It's always hard. We don't understand where we are until the next budget comes out. So I don't know if we were planning on showing us where we are today on expenditures and revenue and other items.
So I'd say this is just a very broad level report on the projected status of the upcoming budget. When you get the actual budget is released, there's a lot of numbers that come out with that have prior actuals as well. At this point in time, we don't have quarterly reporting that we release on a public basis. It's something that as you get an interim or a new finance director comes in, they can continue to work on to provide more information. Did I just sound like I'm passing the buck?
Delegate.
No, I think it's something that we are all interested in. So for example, like how much of our snow removal budget have we blown through with the latest snow removal episodes that we've had? Or, how are we doing on new road constructions? Where are we at on going through some of the enhancements to road improvements? Have we, on those numbers? That gives us a kind of a good idea as we enter the balance of any year. But to get them quarterly would be really great.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say not on all categories, but on some of the key ones.
Thank you, Jane. Anything else at this point? We'll see you again in 2 weeks?
Yes, on the 25th. Thank you
Okay.
very much. We'll get this PowerPoint presentation out to you.
Did you get us what departments will be presenting on that day or not? John will be doing
Can I turn around
that?
and look at you? I'm not sure how far down the path you are of putting the presentation together.
LPD, LFR.
So if we want, okay, can you get
What's the third one?
Health.
health,
Thank you.
LPD, LFR, and health?
All community
You'll send
health.
it to us all, so that way we can look at them a little bit and
Overview of community health, right?
ahead of time.
Down with LPD and.
Oh, will those presentations go out ahead of time, John? Probably.
Yeah, John.
Hey, John Carlson, Mayor's Office. I'll do the same thing I tried to do before, which is try and convert them into a PDF so you have them ahead of the meeting. As we sit here right now, the departments are they're still working on them, yeah, putting them together.
Okay, that'd be great if you can get it to us ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Yay.
Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, we can stand adjourned until 3 o'clock.
So don't we have a directors organizational meeting?
Till 2 o'clock.
We 2 o'clock directors meeting.
Like right now?
Okay. We will take a 2-minute break
2-minute
and then
warning.
go into the directors meeting.
2-minute warning.